In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the Alpha Legion did something few other traitor legions dared. They did not retreat into the safety of the Eye of Terror. Instead, the 20th Legion pressed into the galactic east, pursuing objectives all their own, ones that confounded both Imperial and traitor forces alike. Unlike their peers, the Alpha Legion became embroiled in a series of bitter confrontations with the Ultramarines directly, who themselves were entrenched in the region following Horus's assault on Terra. On Escador, the Alpha Legion faced the Ultramarines in what would become a textbook, if unusually theatrical version, of strategic deception. Alpharius, reportedly delighted, saw the engagement as a chance to demonstrate the superiority of his legion's own flexible doctrine, believing his unpredictable methods and the overall methodology of his legion was superior to the methodical, rigorously codified doctrines of Roboute Guilliman. Guilliman, however, had anticipated the legion's resilience and foresight, along with their overconfidence. Perhaps for the only time in his career until the 42nd millennium, he deliberately acted contrary to his meticulous doctrines, setting up a trap so precise that he supposedly ensnared Alpharius himself. However, the accounts on this incident differ greatly, in particular on the motivations for the encounter. Some claim that Alpharius sought to prove the brilliance of his tactics. Others suggest that Guilliman pursued vengeance against the traitor legions for their role in the wounding of the Emperor and the slaying of Sanguinius. Alpharius' forces supposedly arrived first, selecting the battleground, whereas the Ultramarines, deploying via Thunderhawk, Drop Pod, and Teleport Homer, went straight into the heart of the Alpha Legion's defenses. The surprise itself was devastating, as the 20th Legion's command structure was a true objective of the Ultramarines, and their forces, outnumbered 5-1, were supposedly forced to stay and fight at the head of the valley. In the climax of this attack, at least one Ultramarine states that Guilliman slayed Alpharius. However, the traditional visual signatures of a Primarch being slain did not occur. And having burned what they believed was Alpharius' body on a pyre, they proceeded to slog their way through multiple Alpha Legion operatives who were themselves in rather well-entrenched positions, to the point that it would seem like the entire affair had been set up. That is, if you believe the accounts of a lone Ultramarine, as no other direct record of this event exists. And eventually, Guilliman was forced to retreat, abandoning all hope and orbitally bombarding the planet in order to wipe out any enemy resistance. However, Imperial scholars who have seen the Ultramarines' account argue that the entire battle was orchestrated by the Alpha Legion as a single multi-layered deception, as it would remove pressure from their Primarch, making everyone believe that he had been slain, and it forced Guilliman to retreat, essentially signaling that his legion was in fact inferior. Following Escador, the Alpha Legion would fracture, deliberately scattering across Imperial space in small autonomous warbands, which would be established within hidden bases in asteroid fields, derelict space hulks, and barren worlds, striking at weakened Imperial targets. And this would be long after the heresy had ended. Even today, these remnants continue to operate in the shadow of the Imperium, striking from the darkness with cunning and a persistence that has defined their legion for generations. In the turbulent wake of the Great Scouring, before the 100th century of M31, many of the traitor remnants had fled far into the reaches of Imperial space in order to hide. Most, if not almost all of them, headed straight for the Eye of Terror. Amongst the traitors that did not go directly into the Great Rift was Diant Mal, architect of the Raven Guard's ignominious defeat at the Battle of Lakes, pushed outwards by the resurgent armies of the Emperor of Mankind. Diant Mal and his warband would take refuge in the dark marches of Segmentum Tempestus. There, he struck at Amara Prime, obliterating a major outpost and assembling a entourage of renegades, mutants, and heretics who would call themselves the Shadowed Ones. For decades, hidden amongst debris fields and nebulas that would one day form the Orpheus sector, Diant Mal's forces struck at Imperial expeditions, establishing a reign of terror that spanned decades upon decades. While the ultimate fate of the Shadowed Ones remains unclear, prevailing accounts suggest that Diant Mal met his end at the hands, or rather claws, of what many assume to be reawakened Necron forces of the Mayankar dynasty. Sometime later, word would reach the High Lords of Terra of a Chaos Lord claiming the identity of Alpharius, ravaging the adamantine-laced moons of the Danvra subsector. Debates raged over the possibility of such a claim being true, given that Alpharius' death had been recorded multiple times across history, but no proof of a true Primarch felling had arisen. In large part, this was due to the 20th Legion's flair for confusion, misdirection, and subterfuge. In response, the Officio Assassinorum dispatched 6 elite Vindicare assassins over the course of several standard years. These operatives identified and eliminated a dozen Chaos champions claiming the name of Alpharius. Yet reports of ongoing raids only grew. 5 years later, the decapitated heads of all 6 Vindicare assassins were discovered frozen in the very food storage halls of the High Lords of Terra, as a grim reminder of the Alpha Legion's reach. Later still, the Shrouded Hand, a brotherhood of Alpha Legion chosen, infiltrated the way station of Thrastia Jensen, a key logistical hub for the Golgotha system. While probing the lower strata of society for recruits, they uncovered a hive of gene-stealer cultists, inadvertently triggering a brutal uprising. The streets would then run red with blood as sleeper cells awakened by the Shrouded Hand, having sent coded messages, waged a ferocious guerrilla campaign against the cultists. The Shrouded Hand would vanish without a trace, and once the planetary supply chain was crippled, Zarastria Jensen was left as a broken cog in the Golgotha war machine. Sometime after this, on the psycho-rich world of Seer's Rest, a plague of nightmares consumed the population. Oracles, hedge wizards, and seers reported recurring dreams of serpents reigning across the land. Dreams amplified by the planet's high psychic gestalt, manifesting physically as millions would perish to the venomous bites within a single day. Investigators from the Adeptus Arbites discovered too late that the world's terraforming engines had been spiked with psychotropic gas, heightening the psychic storm. And when the Alpha Legion forces descended to finish off the remaining Guardians, the psychic tempest had reached such an intensity that Seer's Rest was reclassified as a demon world. Thousands of comatose psychers would be abducted and placed into the Legion's custody. After this, in a masterstroke of manipulation, a coven of Alpha Legion sorcerers, leveraging psychic hypnosis, embedded double agents within the Administratum. And by doing so, they convinced Imperial authorities that the Arena system lay in the wrong location. When the Legion invaded Arena 3 and Primarina, psychic distress calls triggered a response. However, they would arrive at the wrong segmentum, as Imperial forces would prevent the fall of both the vital planets of Avrina and Negligence within a single solar year. In 883 M37, the Zambesque Rebellion would occur, and it erupted planet-wide when the governor was questioned by the Dark Angel's 5th Company, declaring open rebellion against the Emperor. The planet soon ambushed the visiting loyal forces, and they were aided by the Alpha Legion Chaos Space Marines. The timely intervention of half the Deathwing prevented the annihilation of the 5th Company as a whole, and the investigation revealed that the governor was indeed a fallen Dark Angel named Solas, who had escaped with his Chaos allies seconds before the Imperial forces were able to restore order. Then would come the relief of Rhea's World, occurring in 814 M39. Rhea's World was a planetary penal facility, known for little else, and it had become a focal point of a concerted attack by a coalition of Alpha Legion warbands. Many within the Segmentum High Command were reluctant to commit already overstretched resources for its defense. Then, almost as if by cosmic coincidence, or perhaps the inscrutable will and desire of the Dark Angels, a strike force of the Sons of the Lion would intervene without warning or even request. The Alpha Legion warbands would be then routed, and their commander captured, though the planet's populace remained blissfully unaware that this deliverance was merely a product of the Dark Angels' ongoing hunt for the fallen. Then would come the Gothic War, occurring during the 12th Black Crusade between 139 and 160 M41. The 12th Black Crusade was a sprawling campaign of death and destruction waged by Abaddon the Despoiler, spanning countless systems, with hundreds of planetary invasions, naval confrontations, and warp-borne maladies. Imperial records of the Alpha Legion's participation are rather scarce, and they're limited primarily to the relatively well-known Levée ambush. Yet anyone familiar with the 20th Legion knows that behind visible clashes, their invisible hand likely orchestrated many of the Chaos Front's successes through their spy networks, covert manipulations, and a careful stoking of rebellion on a planet or two, all choreographed so that the Legion's enemies never knew who was truly attacking them. Later still, another incident with the Alpha Legion's involvement would be the Darathu Plague occurring in 255 M41. The agri-world of Darathu Prime suffered an unexpected calamity, spikes of a rather unique species of locust, previously unknown in the sector, and they erupted all across the planet. And in the planet's warm climate, these swarms multiplied exponentially, devastating crops and triggering planet-wide famine. Civil unrest would erupt in every major population center following this. Much of the planet's military would go so far as to join the rebellion. A Mordian Iron Guard regiment would be dispatched in order to restore order, only to be ambushed and annihilated by the hidden Chaos Space Marines. The loss of food exports triggering a cascading supply chain issue across the subsector for years to come. While no single witness could confirm the Alpha Legion's involvement, patterns, timings, misdirection, and specific tells suggest their unseen orchestration at every stage. Then, between 400 and 470 M41, the Monarchian Heresy would occur. Throughout this heresy, the Alpha Legion allied Chaos cultists carried out subtle, calculated acts of infiltration and subversion, quietly tilting conflicts in their favor. Their manipulation were seldom acknowledged in official records, yet their outcome consistently favored the Alpha Legion's beguiling designs. Then, in 742 M41, the destruction of the Crimson Consuls would occur. The Crimson Consuls, a chapter of Loyalist Space Marines, would fall to the scheme and misdirection propagated by the Alpha Legion. Their destruction was orchestrated without the Alpha Legion ever appearing directly on the battlefield, yet they claimed triumph over their lesser Imperial kin. Then the Achilles Crusade would occur in 777 M41. During the Achilles Crusade, the Imperium aimed at restoring control over their Jericho Reach. As warbands of Alpha Legion consistently opposed Loyalist forces, the battle would continue to get more and more intense. Their tactics were precise and seemingly incidental, but the results speak of a pattern of long-term disruption that only the Alpha Legion could ever orchestrate. However, as it stands, the Jericho Reach seems to be squarely in the control of the Imperium, as they have multiple Death Watch stations within it. In 812 M41, a coalition of Alpha Legion warbands instigated a rebellion in the Munitorum Provender world of Luxor, threatening the flow of war material across the northern Ultima Segmentum. The Ultramarines eventually quelled this uprising, but the societal damage is still long-lasting, as insurrections continuously flared repeatedly over the next century, and some strategio savants trace the fall of the Armada cluster some 80 years later directly to the chronic undersupply that began in 812 M41. In 865 M41, Krenex Valdorus, elevated to demonhood by the Dark Gods, became the target of the White Scar's Khosero Khan, who was tasked with bringing back the Demon Prince's head, or perish dying. The pursuit led the Khan to Quintus, where he discovered not a single warband, but an entire planet of traitors and renegades. Unexpected allies would then emerge, in the form of Kayvon Shrike and the Raven Guard's Third Company. Recognizing the extraordinary threat posed by Valdorus, the rival Loyalist faction set aside their old enmities and united to strike a final blow against the planet's capital, Manakrava. The Demon Prince would then be slain, as his essence would dissipate into the ether. Yet one cannot help but notice that it seems even here the Alpha Legion had foreseen these events, as the majority of their forces were drawn out long before the main charge. Later, during the Tartarus Campaign, the Third Company of the Blood Ravens, under the command of the venerated Captain Gabriel Angelos, was dispatched to support Imperial forces, defending the civilized world of Tartarus, itself currently under siege by an orc war. And what began as a straightforward defensive action quickly unfolded into a labyrinthian maze of hidden threats and betrayals. As the campaign progressed, the Blood Ravens uncovered Tartarus's dark history, a planet littered with relics of the Eldar, relics that they instinctually felt like collecting, which had been left behind in ages past to aid those who would fight the forces of chaos. Few civilizations survived the twin scourges of the orc assaults and chaos corruption, and the population that remained often perished at the hands of one or the other. Yet the orc invasion, though destructive, was merely a smokescreen beneath the clamor of the greenskin warbands, a warband of Alpha Legion Chaos Space Marines commanded by the Chaos Lord Baal and the Chaos Sorcerer Sindir Mir, slipped into the planet undetected, seeking the Maledictum, an ancient, incredibly powerful chaotic relic buried beneath the capital city. Captain Angelos, guided by the twin blessings of instinct and experience, disregarded cautionary warnings from the Ordo Malleus Inquisitor Mordecai Toth, sensing that there was more to the conflict than meets the eye. In the ensuing hunt, Angelos discovered that the forces of Baeltan Eldar had arrived, intent on resealing the demon bound within the Maledictum. The ensuing clash was catastrophic, with the Blood Ravens breaking the back of the Eldar defenders, slaying an avatar of Cain, and decimating many of their warriors. Still, Sindir succeeded in securing the Maledictum and its key, setting the stage for an attempted ascension to demonhood. The most regrettable betrayal came not from an alien or a traitorous enemy, but from within. Librarian Iskander Aikos, once Angelos's initiate, succumbed to the corruptive lure of the Maledictum and handed it to Sindir, believing himself in control while the truth had been that he was manipulated from the very start. Angelos confronted Archios in personal combat, vanquishing the traitor. However, while this occurred, Sindir harnessed the Maledictum to begin his transformation into Demon Prince, but Angelos ended the threat, shattering the artifact with a demon hammer forged from a shard of the Wailing Doom, the very blade that had slain the avatar of Cain. Yet victory would be bittersweet due to the sheer bloodshed on Tartarus. Both Imperial and Xenos alike ended up empowering the trapped demon's awakening upon the artifact's very destruction. Its final whispered words hinted at a connection to Inquisitor Thoth, suggesting that the Inquisitor may not have been as pure as he had appeared. Angelos, pressed for time and survival, could pursue the matter no further, leaving this mystery unsolved and evacuating the planet of his forces. One of the next major incidents involving the Alpha Legion would be the ambush at Kruger Ridge. On Ignis Prime, Chapter Master Quelash Ickblood of the Excoriators came to inspect the mountaintop garrison of Kruger Ridge, only to find a scene of carnage. The garrison had been obliterated in an ambush orchestrated by the Alpha Legion Chaos Space Marines, who had arrived long before them. Within the Ocularium, Chapter Scourge Zachariah Crush fell to an insidious toxin known as Dorn's Darkness, failing both his master and his chapter, leaving the Alpha Legion unimpeded in their objectives. The Legion's goals were just as finicky as they were cruel. Their near-successful assassination of Akerbud, coupled with the theft of the Stygimatur, the revered chapter standard dating back to the second founding, and this act struck at the very heart of the Excoriators' morale. Ichabod was gravely wounded, as he was stuck, writhing in envenomed agony as the apothecarian struggled to counteract the toxin, which had no known antidote. Though the assassination would ultimately fail, its effects were lethal. The chapter master would eventually succumb much later to this poison. His death, while not immediate, was a testament to the Alpha Legion's preference and panache for manipulation, subterfuge, and poisoning over straightforward combat. Then would come the Kaurava Campaign, occurring at an unknown date in M41. The campaign for the Kaurava system unfolded as a veritable maelstrom of war, where the Blood Ravens found themselves engaged not with a single enemy, but with nearly every major threat the galaxy could muster against them. Within this battlefield stood the Astra Militarum, devoted forces of the Order of the Sacred Rose, of the Adeptus Sororitas, orcs under the relentless Wa of Gorguts, Eldar of the craft world Ulthway, Dark Eldar of the Cabal of the Black Heart, Chaos Space Marines of the Alpha Legion, led by a cornate champion known as Fiverus Charon, and even the Tau, all coalescing on a single spot. Adding to this calamity, Necrons of Kaurava III, a tomb world buried for millions of years, had awakened under the command of their newly risen Necron Lord, and descended upon the battlefield with the cold and calculated inevitability of millennia. This outcome was disastrous, as the Blood Ravens suffered grievous losses. Captain Indrik Bora and the entirety of his 5 companies vanished amidst the chaos. Beyond that, Imperial records remain frighteningly opaque, leaving historians and strategists alike to piece together the events from fragmentary reports. In the aftermath, the Kaurava system became a cautionary tale of overexertion, misfortune, and the hazards of fighting too many foes at once, especially foes who, according to rumor, may or may not have coordinated amongst themselves. The Alpha Legion seemingly having orchestrated forces that would never work together to not only coexist, but to form an assault on multiple fronts in a coherent sense. The final major incident of galactic note involving the Alpha Legion occurred between 001 and 025 M42. In the wake of the Great Rift, the galaxy's fabric was torn asunder, and the stability of the Imperium was left crippled. Amongst the forces seeking dominion over the strategically vital worlds of Vigilus in the Imperium Nihilus were Alpha Legion heretic Astartes, operating in concert with other allies of Abaddon the Despoiler. Their participation, though often unrecorded to their full detail, served to complicate the defenses of Vigilus, as Vigilus would undergo a series of uprisings and what appears to be sabotage as the forces of chaos sow chaos wherever loyalist forces sought to assert control. In tandem with this would be the Nest of the Serpents, an incident occurring in M42, and perhaps no modern operation more aptly demonstrates the Alpha Legion's true talent than such. As the Great Rift ripped into existence, billions of mortal eyes turned to the stars, only to find confusion and fear mirrored in every shadow. Across countless worlds, serpent cells and hypnotically conditioned agents blinked into action, their mental imperatives triggered by the Legion's long-seated plans. A wave of anarchy swept through the Imperium as citizens already restricted from gazing into the night sky due to reactionary laws enacted after the Great Rift's appearance now found their worlds in turmoil. In the wake of this confusion, the Alpha Legion's operatives transformed riots into full-scale wars as dozens of worlds fell swiftly to their machinations. All the while, hidden cults spread heresy, drawing Imperial forces away from strategic targets, allowing the Alpha Legion's primary forces, or what we might call them as illusionary strike teams, struck targeted critical locations with devastating force. Unlike other traitor legions, most of the Alpha Legion does not linger in the warp. Instead, they move through the galaxy as scattered autonomous warbands, allowing each of them to both act and react in accordance to not only their own will but the greater will of the whole, each cell trained to operate independently towards a shared, unknowable goal. This decentralization may explain why they have largely avoided the mutations of chaos, possibly reflecting some lingering loyalty to the greater desires of the Emperor of Mankind, in particular the perpetuation of humanity for as long as possible. Or it may just be another misdirection by the ever so confounding Legion. The Legion's activities have earned them the undying wrath of the Inquisition and the hatred of the Ordo Malleus and the Ordo Hereticus, who have dedicated vast resources to hunting down any and all of their hidden enclaves. The High Lords of Terra, on no fewer than 3 occasions, have declared the Alpha Legion fully exterminated, once in the 31st millennium, again in the 32nd millennium, and yet a third time in the 39th millennium. Yet each time a new Alpha Legion inspired plot or a new cell emerges somewhere across the Imperium, proving that much like the Hydra, for every head they cut off, 2 more will rise and take its place. Though whether those heads were ever truly connected is a question that the Imperium and historians must hazard to ask. In conclusion, one of the most chilling lines attributed to Alpharius comes from the novelization of his own origin, and it goes as follows: I am Alpharius, immediately echoed by the revelation of "this was a lie." This paradoxical proclamation in one of the few sources of knowledge that is supposedly concrete records of the 20th Legion's legacy leave no shadow of a doubt that the identity of the very Legion is an illusion. Loyalty, misdirection, and truth as a weapon, whether it's truly deceased or whether he is still out there, hidden behind a mask of subterfuge, is one of many of the mysteries that the Alpha Legion has lain, and that the Imperium has yet to solve.